Speaking of great segues, please welcome to the show Barbara Edmonds, MP for Mana. Welcome.
Kia ora. So it sounds like
Barbara.
big shoes to fill following Dunkel.
Dunkel. I love it. No,
Duncan revealed he's actually really good with kiddies. So a lot of us, MPs that used to have young toddlers and stuff, we used to call him Uncle Dunkel. So there's one for you.
Oh no, he'll be upset you revealed that. We might use it against him. No, we wouldn't. Well, thanks for coming on. I suppose the thing that you would like to chat about today, or we'd like to chat with you about, is some interesting news coming out of America that might have a bit of an effect on us here. We were kind of waiting for the shoe to drop for New Zealand, I think most of us, in regards to Trump and all of his many executive orders and flurries of things and tariffs that he's thrown out there. I think he already went for, was it Colombia? He tried to come for them and they said no. So I guess our one now that we've been thrown into is our, what do you call it, the DST, is that correct?
Yeah, the digital services tax, and whether Trump, as part of his executive orders, will have retaliatory measures against us. So the Post actually, Tom Pulistrika did a really good article on that today. It's been something we're kind of watching. So to kind of wind things back a little bit, the taxation of the digital economy is something that countries for a long time have been grappling with. Basically, this is where countries are domiciled in another area but trade their services in another country, and whether that country that consumes those services has taxing rights. So the Organisation of Economic Cooperation and Development for a number of years has been trying to get to sort of a multilateral agreement, basically. So who has taxing rights and when? Unfortunately, it's taking a long time. I would say probably over 5 years. And as you can imagine, when you've got all these states, you've got to try, when I say states, I mean countries, you've got to try and negotiate in a particular way. The US has been part of those negotiations, and they kind of cooled when Trump was in, and then they kind of got a bit more warmed up when the Biden administration was in. So really the digital services tax New Zealand, which I introduced as one of the last measures in the last Labor government, was basically saying if that OECD doesn't come to this multilateral agreement, then we have an opportunity to tax these platforms that have services in New Zealand a 3% flat tax if they have sort of, as a group, they have over 750 million euros. The issue though right now is that that's in legislation, which when National came in, they bumped it down the order paper. My bill was supposed to apply from 1 January 2025. National has said, well, the earliest it could apply is 1 January next year. But actually the major issue with that is the tax that was estimated it would bring in was about 480 million. So it's not chump chips, it's, a considerable amount of money. The issue that's now happened is that with Trump coming in his executive orders, he's saying like countries that he wants, on his first day was basically to say any country that has or is likely to have discriminatory taxes against US companies, so these large platforms which are domiciled in the US, he wants to recommend sort of those retaliatory measures against them. So what does that mean for Nicola Willis? And what does that mean, especially when there's $480 million banked in the government's books about it?
One of the questions I have is, it says in here that the Treasury are the ones that put it into the budget or into the estimated revenue, even though the bill hasn't gone into law. Do you know why they do that?
So that's sort of a convention that sort of came in from Bill Birch, which is basically once Cabinet makes a decision on a policy, then technically you can bank that money into the government's books. So the fact is that Cabinet under Labor decided, yes, we're going to bring this tax in. We drafted legislation for it. It was introduced as basically all the indicators to say that this money will eventually come in. So for the National Party, they've bumped it down, so which means we had Treasury this morning in front of the Finance Expenditure Select Committee. I did raise this and said, would this be one of the reasons why you would revise your estimates? Because with the executive orders, the Fair Digital Media Bill, which is another one which could be seen as a retaliatory measure, or the Digital Services Tax Bill, will they revise those numbers? And they said, it's too early to tell. But it still leaves Nicola Willis with that predicament, which is Trump has indicated he wants these measures against countries like New Zealand, which has indicated we're going to do a digital services tax. And how does she deal with that? What will be a hole if she removes it?
So just to be absolutely clear here, we're talking about Meta, Amazon, all of those big international tech companies that have a presence here and do advertising here and sell products here. Those guys.
Yep.
These guys.
So basically, I'll let you. Yeah, I mean, I'll confirm that the bill related to social media, content sharing platforms, internet search engines, digital advertising, and like user generated data. So it was the whole stream of them. And there are some countries that already have a digital services tax. So some countries have moved faster because they believe that the OECD wasn't working fast enough around that multilateral agreement, because again, it's a negotiation at that level. So, there's some digital services taxes in Europe, like Austria, Denmark, France, Poland, etc., the UK, but also the likes of India also have it as well. So they've implemented these digital service taxes, but they also, like New Zealand was really hoping that the OECD would come to this multi-jurisdictional, multilateral agreement, so that, again, you don't have the arbitrage where basically you avoid tax in one country by shifting or structuring your affairs in another country to avoid it. So that's what the hope was. And again, that money is booked in. So it's going to be interesting to see in budget how Nicola Willis deals with that, or as Trump gets a bit more of his policy as to what he's going to do with his measures, what's the impact on New Zealand's economy as a result of that? Like, will we get tariffs? More tariffs?
I'll also point out, just before I put this photo away, this is one of the few pictures from this grouping at the inauguration where Zuckerberg isn't looking down Bezos's new wife's shirt. So
he's trying
just a
not to,
notable
clearly.
photo because of that.
Another question I had for you. So with them not, with them delaying it, does that mean that the intention is always to have it go into law, or is it one of those points where they have to eventually let it go through, or could they say we're not doing this because of Trump's retaliation?
Well, government controls the order paper of Parliament, so currently it's bumped right down the list. They control whether it comes up or whether it moves down. Again, the legislation is currently drafted that you can change the application date through order in council. The minister, obviously through that post-media report earlier this morning, has said, the earliest will be next year. So it's really up to the government as to how they do it. They're still banking on the money because they haven't made a conscious decision to withdraw the bill and not do it. So that money is still banked in the government's accounts.
Interesting. So I guess Nicola's growth budget that's coming up in a few months is going to look a little different, do we think? Or is it still going to be in there?
Yeah, we had an interesting session with Nicola today at Finance Expenditure Select Committee, and we also had the Treasury. Yeah, we did. And, so after if you remember back to budget last year, within 2 weeks, they had to change their budget because they hadn't accounted for cancer drugs. So that took up a big chunk so it's pre-committed spending to budget 2025. So they had got a 2.4 operating allowance for new initiatives. So the cancer drugs took a big chunk of that because they underestimated basically the protest to their peril, and basically then 2 weeks later did a U-turn. So after some of the measures which they've already banked to budget 25, they have around 600 million, 700 million left in this operating allowance. This morning, I asked the Minister of Finance, will that be sufficient enough to cover inflation and demographics in health? Are you confident? And she says yes. I asked her about education. She said yes. And she said police as well. And I use police as the other vote. The reason why I picked those particular votes is because they're quite expensive. In particular for teachers, there'll be some negotiations happening at some point in the very near future. So she said yes, she's confident that that's the remaining amount of money of that operating allowance will cover inflation and demographic changes. So it's great to get that on record because it's something that we will hold her to. But I think the other interesting issue that came out today, which is when we had Treasury, was that Luxon has been saying since yesterday morning that New Zealand has been in recession for 3 years. Rubbish, like absolute rubbish. And that's me saying that. And so he also repeated that claim in the House. My concern is that he is seeding that as the line to cover national for what's happening currently by saying, oh, we've been in recession for 3 years. You know, the more and more you say that line and rinse and repeat it, the more and more people will believe it. So I called him out yesterday in a PR, said you're wrong. Like a recession technically is two basically quarters of negative growth. We had Treasury this morning. I asked Treasury, have we been in a recession over the last 3 years? Treasury's chief economist said no, actually on revised figures, we were growing, except in 2024 when we had 2 quarters of negative growth. So absolute rubbish, wrong, lying to the public. And so it was good to be able to have that on record by Treasury because, yeah, who cares what the opposition finance spokesperson says, but actually your chief economist confirmed that the Prime Minister was wrong.
Nice. Good on you.
Wow. Nice.
Got to call it out, eh? Got to call it out now because it's like these lines that they have, they clearly just have this, they must workshop it or something, or, you know, they have a stakeholder group that they workshop their communications lines and then, you know, give credit to their caucus. They just rinse and repeat them. And then it becomes such a conscious thought and a subconscious thought in the public. So it's time to start calling out those lies.
Good on you.
So we know now that the budget is what is it, March 22nd?
Yeah,
May
May
22nd.
May 22nd. So now I would imagine that there's going to be a lot of scrambling around covering these holes and I guess a lot of bills coming due. Like we're still promised an announcement about the IREX ferries. That funding hasn't been mentioned about that. Dunedin Hospital is obviously very much on my mind down here. There are supposed to be answers in that budget, I would imagine. But what you're talking about here is that they're going to have less income than they planned and more outgoing costs.
Yep, potentially. And also it depends on what Trump does to retaliate because there could be other measures. There could be tariffs, which means that you're not getting as much money in and your growth projections because parts of the economy will be affected by those tariffs. So it's, you know, it's basically money in, money out, and obviously the externalities of other countries and their laws. But the major thing is that she's got $600 to $700 million left in the kitty for budget 2025. I really don't think she's got enough money to cover everything. And then the interesting thing she also said at Select Committee today was budget's going to be full of regulations and laws to help with economic growth. For a finance minister who basically blasted Labor, likes to use the word verbiage. Like I've never heard that word. English is my second language. Well, I've never heard that word verbiage until it came out of the Minister of Finance's mouth. It was in reference to basically all these budget documents full of words, you know, to all this fluffy stuff. And now she's coming out basically saying on budget night, we're going to be releasing a whole bunch of words and laws that they're going to change regulations. So it seems like she's trying to pad her no budget with something.
You know why that is, don't you, Barbara? Because her qualifications are in English. You can't say it. I can say it. Because her qualifications are in English. She's busting out the $5 words because she's going to be lacking the actual dollars when her budget comes around. Look, she should be concerned. Like when we're looking at Trump basically kicking off trade war after trade war after trade war as an exporting country, I can't imagine that we are going to want to pick a fight there. So the choice is stick to your guns or shelve this piece of legislation and lose the income. There's no winning for New Zealand there.
No, I mean, and the thing is, what we could see is that by not making an active decision to withdraw that bill and just waiting for Trump to roll out what those, to see what Trump is going to threaten with those measures, which he can. He's the president of the United States. He has that ability to do so, make the laws. It'll be interesting to see whether we see it in this budget or will be in the 26 budget. The issue is she pushes it out to the 26 budget to withdraw that bill and withdraw that, make a new cabinet decision to withdraw it. That's election year. So you're in a rock and a hard place if you're the finance minister and this is what's being threatened.
From your experience, you certainly know more about this than I do. I'm also a Nicola Willis. I'm an arts person, the words, the numbers. What are we better off doing? The revenue from the original bill, legislation, law, the tax revenue, or the tariffs and what they would do to us? Which is the better of the two, or worse of the two, I guess?
I'd actually take it a step back. I wouldn't put New Zealand in a position where you're so dependent on a decision like that in order to make your books balance. So no, we've been saying that the tax cuts were unaffordable. You chose to do $2.9 billion for landlords. You chose to give over $200 million for tax breaks for tobacco companies. I would have taken it back a step to say the choices we have made would not have put us in such a difficult position that we would have to choose, make it difficult for us that we depended on that $480 million. And that's a conscious choice by the Minister of Finance to basically prioritize those things. Yes, tax cuts are a great thing for Kiwis. Some people say it gives relief. Some people say I don't even see it because it's been chewed up by my rents, my insurance, and my rates that have gone up. Thank you very much for my rent supposedly going down. But the major thing is that, she's no Sir Bill English. They promised tax cuts. They waited a year before they did it because the economic conditions weren't right for it. She doesn't have that same political nous, and that's probably because she promised her job on it. So that's a bit foolish.
I find the numbers quite interesting because we're talking about $480 million, which seems like a lot probably to the average person, but I guess when you compare that to the $2.9 billion given back to landlords and tax cuts, how do those numbers even add up? I mean, we're talking about a revenue and tax, right? I mean, it's a small amount, sure, but how do landlords get 2.9 billion? And is it because they own so much? Is it the property values? I don't get it. It seems ridiculous, does it not?
I mean, again, it goes to who their constituency is, right? And it's the same way that they reduced the Bright Line test from 10 years down to 2 years. We'd still had interest deductibility under Labor, but it was for new builds. So it incentivized new builds. So we still had interest deductibility. But the main reason why we wanted to remove it is we wanted the chance for first-time buyers to get on the market. So yes, you have landlords who go off the market because actually it's no longer in their interest to hold residential property. But the house doesn't disappear. It's still there. It means somebody else can actually buy that house. So for me, it bewilders me, the choices that they make. I look at the Lunches in Schools program, starting to see through different social media accounts and families sharing it, that the lunches, which basically they saved half of what we were spending on it, but the meal quality isn't as good. And the fact is, just research showed last week that actually children who are hungry are 4 to 5 years behind in literacy or math standards. That's a choice. They chose to cut down that policy, and that's versus 130 million, that's versus $2.9 billion for tax breaks for landlords. You put it that way, and it's like feed hungry kids who get an education, which helps our productivity in the long run, or give tax breaks for landlords of current housing which therefore means they invest in an unproductive part of the economy. So for me, it's not a choice I would have, if it was an easy choice for me, it would have been feed the kids.
Absolutely. What do you got,
There's your
Chewie?
school lunch.
Yum.
Yeah, that doesn't look great.
I mean,
But
the
yeah,
other
you're
element,
right. The choices have been made.
and the other element of it was employment. It wasn't getting done by a big corporate, globally owned corporate company that was just, basically slapping these off a factory belt. These were hiring local mums and dads who could work in the local school cafeteria, could make these lunches, could adjust the menu, knowing on what this is what I was seeing in Porirua. It really was giving them jobs, and this is the fact is that people lost their jobs as a result of these contracts going to these big global companies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that comes back to something that I've commented about this government quite a few times, that it is, and especially when it's David Seymour, it's they understand the cost of everything, but they don't understand the value. Yeah. And it's the whole thing. Like, government has for decades has considered things like when you're carpeting a government office, maybe it's worth spending a little bit more to buy New Zealand wool carpets instead of imported nylon ones. All of those things, they have a flow-on effect. Just the community building aspect of building those school lunches and having people in the community knowing that they're doing work that goes towards their young people in their community using local produce. How could you not see something like that and go, you know what, that's probably worth the money?
Yeah, those spillover benefits.
All of that stuff's good.
Yeah, the spillover benefits from lunches in schools, which kept local people employed. A lot of schools in my area have a school garden, which they then made the kids do as part of the curriculum, teaching them how to grow the food, which then gets cooked in the kitchen, getting the kids to actually help with it. These were all spillover benefits that are non-quantifiable in some ways, but builds communities and builds different skills, which I believe in the longer run, and which research shows you feed the kids properly, they learn better.
Yep, and you create productive citizens, and then you've got your productivity, Luxon.
Like when they talk about things that were better in the good old days, let's get New Zealand back on track, right? Home ec classes in schools and learning how to cultivate food and all of that sort of stuff. That's all flow-on effect stuff. How to feed yourself properly. Nutrition, all big benefit stuff, but the focus was on let's give a big international company that does meals in prisons in the UK.
They do meals in some of our hospitals as well. I know because I have family that worked for these companies, when they were chefs or cooks in the commercial kitchens in the hospitals and stuff like that. But I mean, the fact is you've removed all those other spillover benefits, like you listed, with local employment, local food, and so it's very much what Chippy was saying around this neoliberal playbook that happens. You basically starve it, it falls over, and then you sell it off to someone else. So it's pretty much that same principle.
No one's eating the lunches. It's proof that we don't need to do it.
Yeah, time will tell because school's only just started. But, so far the feedback has not been great.
No.
My last question, unless Chewie's got some after me. How, we're talking about sort of the connections and the flow-on effects and sort of that long-term vision, how do you get the public to understand that and not just focus on the here and now, tax breaks, that sort of thing?
It's really a lesson in communication, and it's something that, even as Labor going through the last election, we've reflected on, is around that comms, which is why it was really important we nipped it in the butt straight away around that messaging of 3 years of recession. You got to give it to the Nats. They're really quick sound bites is what the public heard over and over and over and over again. Wasteful spending. For us to explain wasteful spending, well, did you get the wage subsidy after COVID? Your local fire station, how it's had a refurb, that's wasteful spending, apparently. You know, all these different, you know, your local pool that got updated, your local surf club that got updated. This is wasteful spending. You know, we would have to explain that it's not wasteful spending. So you got to give it to the right. They've managed to really distill the messaging through whatever they're, you know, they get a lot more money and they can pay for the sort of stakeholder, you know, whatever it is, the testing of these messages. But that's why now for labourers, as these messages come up, we need to absolutely shut them down straight away with the actual facts. And we were really fortunate today. Don't have to listen to me, but I'm sure you'll listen to the Treasury chief economist who said it was wrong.
Depends. They were calling him a bit of a wokie with his lefty wokie, wasn't that coming up at some point? He's on your side too much. That can't be right. He's not centre at all. He's unbiased. Blah, blah, blah.
No, he was only previously the chief economist of a large Australian bank, you know.
Famous
Yeah.
lefties.
Yeah,
Famous.
yeah.
Yeah. But again, it's not his fault. He's just technically telling the truth. That's what it is.
Yeah. Chewie, any last questions?
Well, we've got a couple of questions in the chat. If you're happy to field them, Barbara.
Yeah, go for it.
Maybe not starting with a question, but a comment. My kids won't eat the lunches anymore. They're crap. So there's some more that feedback.
Can I say, any of those that got feedback, email it to jan.tanetti@parliament.gov.nz. Jan can use it.
Cool. Excellent. Here's a question here from Brian Turner. Is Destiny Church a charity? Will you tax charities if you get the chance?
Basically, they must be based on their trust setup, or their charitable trust setup, because we have a charity services who does all the auditing, etc., etc. Actually, Labor actively looked at this. Actually, even National looked at taxing those that don't had charitable status but weren't distributing the charitable receipts that they were getting. The hardest thing that both under National and Labor, because there was a 2014 trusts and charities review, the hardest thing is trying that you want to put the line in somewhere as to what's a charity and what's a not. You know, you don't want to capture the Salvation Army, the Mary Potter hospices that run businesses. You know, they sell clothing or they sell secondhand furniture to raise money for the charity. But at the same time, if you're actually a commercial company who's selling, I don't know, maybe breakfast cereal or something, you know, there's a question about that. It's actually the distribution of that's the most important thing. So for me, I've always said it right throughout the election as well, is that we need to look at that distribution. Because, you know, do the rules need to change there? Which is basically, if you're getting money in, you know, covering your expenses of holding your shop, etc., should we be taxing you if you're not distributing it within a certain period? That's actually a really hard technical question and a difficult question for tax purposes. And I would know that because, I practiced tax for over 10 years.
Would I be right in thinking that for the longest time the assumption is that churches do charity, so we'll just take them at their word, and that churches have changed in that time?
That mean it's still based on a very, very old test around charitable purpose, you know, and the law, you know, the law's interpreted that over the centuries. But it has changed, and to your point, things have changed, and what's a church and what's not, and what's not probably today in 2025 is very different from when it was introduced in like the 1700s or something.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's definitely worth looking at, but whether that's going to be the gold mine for Nicola Willis as part of her budget, we'll see, you know. And the thing is, again, those protections for those charities like the Salvation Army, like Mary Potter Hospice, who are doing distributions but have a commercial element through their secondhand stores, you don't want to impact them. So you've got to be super careful.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Now, I honestly don't know how you're going to field this question, but because I like chaos, I'm going to ask it. Barbara, does Willis come across as condescending in meetings as she does in the media?
The interesting thing is I would say, does Willis come across as condescending in person, in Parliament, in select committee meetings, as she does in the media? Yeah, probably would say what you're seeing is probably the same thing I'm seeing. So I would agree if that's what you're thinking.
Okay.
I mean, like
Sure.
it's not hard. It's not hard to hide, you know. When she's yelling at me in response to a question, it's that member blah 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 blah, and so it's like you can make your point, and it doesn't matter whether you want to be condescending, whether you want to try and teach me a lesson. I'm here for a reason, and it's to hold you to account. And I've been through some harder stuff than another female using quite strong language against me, so I don't get offended by it. So take your best shot, man.
Yeah, there's been a few comments in the chat. We've had a few comments in the chat that apparently you were called financially incompetent.
Oh yeah, apparently, and supposedly
which our chat is really enjoying. That
Yeah,
Nicola Willis said that to you.
Yeah, I also said I need to get off my high horse in the house. Also, I need to take a chapter out of real life. This is saying it to the person that was brought up on a benefit, that lost their mother at 5, that was brought up by a solo dad. Yeah, I need to get a chapter out of real life. I wonder what that real life looks like.
Wonder what her real life looks like.
Yeah.
That's all on record. That's
cool.
That's the reputation she wants to have. And if you've got listeners and viewers who are basically bring it up in the chat, then I'm seeing the same thing. But it doesn't bother me. So just want to assure you.
That's good.
Fantastic.
That's good. There is one, if you've got 5 minutes to answer this one. Thanks to Nicola No Growth. I don't know if you've heard Nikki Noba. I'm sure it's floated around. It's over time, it's slowly morphed into Nikki No Growth. Nikki No Budget is what I saw in the chat earlier. Well, Nikki No Growth, $2. Well, would like to know, what would Labor do to boost economic growth, seeing as the next budget has been dubbed the growth budget, I think it was.
Yeah, so first of all, you wouldn't provide unaffordable tax cuts and take money out of the productive economy. So, for example, Treasury in a report last year set out there were really 5 key reasons why New Zealand's productivity has declined over the years. One of them is our lack of investment in science and innovation. Well, the thing I wouldn't do is cut scientists and innovators by disestablishing, for example, Callaghan Institute, by disestablishing jobs in GNS science. So, these are really highly skilled scientists that we need in New Zealand. How are we meant to have that research and innovation in those key areas if you're basically getting rid of them and saying, oh, by the way, we don't really need you in New Zealand, you might as well go to Australia, which a lot of them have done. Or, as I saw with one of the GNS scientists, he's a geophysicist, quite flash. He'd gone back, he got a contract straight away in Germany because they wanted him. The interesting thing is I went to London late last year, to talk to the insurance industry because I wanted to be able to see how our reinsurers view New Zealand to help bring our insurance premiums down. One of the things they constantly said, these reinsurers, so these are the guys that these are the companies that reinsure the insurance companies here in New Zealand. They were saying, do not change GNS science. It is world-class science that we, as reinsurers, use as part of our forecasting to forecast the premiums we put in insurers in New Zealand. Didn't have the heart to tell them that a whole bunch of them had just been fired. So research, science and innovation, don't cut the budget. That's one thing that Labor would have to make sure that we basically start to rebuild, because we need science, we need innovation. There does need to be some of it in government, but also that's what Callaghan Institute was doing as well. I've got to give credit to Megan Woods with the R&D tax credit. That was a big reason why she brought it in, was to try and boost some productivity growth in that research space. One of the other key areas that was why New Zealand was failing was just around education. It's not that our rates were dropping below worldwide sort of levels. It's just that we weren't advancing as fast as we used to. So we still have a sound education system, but it wasn't growing at the getting the results or faster results like we previously had. So what does the research tell us? Kids that go to school hungry don't learn. Feed the kids. Make sure that you support teachers. You know, if the curriculum needs to change, work with the teachers who actually teach the curriculum around those changes that are needed in order to teach kids better. The skills and employment through apprenticeship boost, you know, the way that we look at basically, not every kid when they leave school has to go to tertiary education. Actually, trades are just as important. We need tradies. So being able to support that part of the sector means that we have construction sector workers here who therefore, when the government decides or when Labor decides to invest in infrastructure, we have the workforce here. So there's a lot of things, again, really good report by Treasury. Or anybody who's a geek out there that loves reading that stuff, have a read of it, because basically it sets it out really clearly where we need to strengthen. But what we're seeing from the government is a lot of cuts to those key areas because they think that the market will do it. Well, the market doesn't have that many jobs to offer right now.
Not a lot of people to take them. They keep running away. I just wanted to, before you head off, Barb, you're the bomb. Some great comments from our. A lot of love in the chat for you. And someone did mention that Barbara was good in question time today. So there you go. High praises.
Thanks, Daniel.
Chewie, any last comments or anything, or Barbara? If you
no, I am tapped out at this point. It's been fantastic having you on tonight, Barbara. We love hearing the goss and what's going on in Parliament and that sort of thing. And I'm sure you'll agree, it's a very different environment here on BHN. You don't get more than a 5-minute soundbite.
Yeah, totally. And we love platforms like this. But I just want to do a shout out to all the kiddies who've gone back to school. My 5 start to go back to school. So I've got 4 in college and 1 in intermediate. The last one in intermediate, they kind of start from tomorrow. And then 3 of my kids at uni. So a big shout out to all the kiddies going back to school. Stay in school,
what
kids.
universities?
Well, you know, we're in Wellington, so they're going to Vic Uni. Yeah.
Cool.
Nice. Keep it close.
Didn't stuff up yet, man. There's 3 out of 8. That's not bad.
Well, it's still impressive. Good. Well, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it. Thanks for talking us through all those numbers, economics, financy things, because I definitely could not have explained it as well as you did, and put it all into context. So we really appreciate it.
Ka kite.
All right, Keju, thank you for coming on. Bye.